Goldsmith Library for this next in this series of occasional talks, and today I'm delighted to welcome Fintan O'Toole as our featured speaker. I'd like at first to compliment the library staff, Joe and the team, for putting on this particular series, and I think you'll find today most interesting. Fintan O'Toole needs, as they say quite regularly, no introduction. He has been a commentator outside of the centre for so long, and there comes a phase in one's life when one gets perhaps drawn to the centre, or perhaps the centre moves towards one. And when a person is mentioned as a possibility of being Mayor of Dublin, you know that something has changed. Fintan has had an extraordinarily fine career, both as a journalist, and now he speaks from the platform of the Irish Times with great authority, and some of you will have read the article of yesterday. Has had time as a drama critic, a man with great interests in literary doings, so we would have shared at the same time a particular faculty in university. He has spent time as correspondent in China, so he brings a wealth of experience. And with that interest in literature, and as a commentator, he comes from a great tradition, one that obviously goes back and includes Swift. And it's from Swift that obviously we get the title Ship of Fools from this latest volume. It would be foolhardy of me to start to explain the volume when we have the author here, so I'll say no further and hand over to Fintan O'Toole.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for coming. I know it's not the most cheerful thing to do in the middle of a dull winter afternoon, to talk about where we are and how we got here. But maybe sometimes actually try to understand the process of what's led us to our current situation could be seen at least as the beginning of getting out of it. And what I tried to do with this book really was to try to construct a polemical narrative really of the creation of this disaster in the way that I would see it. I suppose the easiest place to start with is looking at two quite simple things, which is if you take that period between, say, 1995, when the Celtic Tiger started, and 2008, when it finally collapsed, over that period of 13 years, what changed and what didn't change? And I think if we can answer those questions, we begin to get some sense of what created this, in many ways, quite surreal disaster. If we look at what changed, you could say that in some ways everything changed. The pace of alteration in Irish culture, Irish society, the Irish economy over that period is absolutely extraordinary. If you're sort of in ancient middle age like I am, the sense of excitement and the sense of transformation that was really present, say, by the late 1990s was really pretty historic. It's sometimes hard to remember, and of course some of you are far too young to remember, the extent to which we took certain things for granted in Ireland. Huge parts of our historic experience seemed sort of fixed. We seemed doomed to certain realities. And those three realities were kind of interrelated, but we were, first of all, plugged into the idea that the Irish question, in terms of the Northern Ireland conflict, but also in terms of the broader architecture of that question, was insoluble. We were historically and culturally perhaps attuned to the idea that emigration was a paradoxical continuity in Irish culture. That really from, arguably from the mid-18th century onwards, but certainly from the mid-19th century onwards, emigration had been one of the great constants of Irish life, with I think hugely debilitating effects. And underdevelopment, the sense that we were doomed to being the sort of poor man of Western Europe. those perceptions would have lain very heavily on say, people of my generation. And in some ways they've been made worse by the fact that I would have grown up in a period of great optimism. Part of what makes me slightly perhaps detached in one way from the current events is that, we've seen this before. I grew up in the 1960s when there was an extraordinary economic boom in Ireland, when emigration finished, when modernisation was happening at a very rapid pace, and when there was this sense, we grew up being told, you are the first generation of Irish people who won't have to emigrate. You're the first generation of Irish people for whom Irish independence is a great success, economic success. And the bad days are now over and we're into a new kind of future. And of course, both in terms of the eruption of the Northern Ireland conflict at the end of the 1960s and in terms of the economic crisis that unfolded in the early 1970s, neither of those things turned out to be true. So when you've been through a period of optimism and boom, and then it collapses, you go into a mode of thinking, kind of fatalism, you think, well, this is the way it is. Nothing we do is ever going to really make any fundamental difference. And that seemed to have changed really quite fundamentally in the late 1990s. And it's important, because a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is negative, to sort of remember that this was pretty damn wonderful. That actually, for a few years there, not just economically in terms of the creation of jobs, not just in terms of the reversal of emigration. It's an extraordinary moment in Ireland where this emigrant society became an immigrant society. Where the outflow of people, of energy, of ideas, of creativity that had been so much part of us seemed to be being reversed, and that actually we were becoming a place to which people wanted to come. I never had a problem with immigration. I always thought, what a fantastic compliment for a society that has been exporting its people for so long. The idea that people actually see this as a place worth coming to. I remember for people of my generation, coming to Ireland to look for a job was like going to the Sahara for the skiing. It was an extraordinary reversal of common sense. What happened to us in terms of the boom that took off in 95, coinciding with, and I think facilitating in very important ways, the peace process in Northern Ireland. It's important to say that one of the things that facilitated the peace process in Northern Ireland was the idea that the South was not a dump of reactionary 19th century Catholic triumphalism and economic failure, which is the way modern Protestants were used to seeing it. The sense of optimism about the South, the sense that the South was a changing society which was becoming more open, which was becoming more vibrant, actually did feed in very important ways, I think, into the peace process itself. And those changes, let's remember, were really quite profound, and I think had very important kind of psychological consequences for most Irish people. Not just the sort of the material changes, but I think we felt a lot better about ourselves, and I think we felt a much more, a stronger sense of optimism about the future. That's the good bit. Now, we then have to look at what didn't change, and why it didn't change. And ultimately, at the sort of almost tragic sense that the things that didn't change ate up the things that did change. That the continuities within Irish culture, in the broad sense, became fatal for the process of change that was going on. One of the things I think we have to sort of take note of is that maybe because change happened in certain ways in Ireland, we failed ourselves to understand why it happened and what was happening to us. I would suggest that this was for two reasons at least. One is the rapidity of the change. I mean, let's remember that we went within 5 years we doubled the GNP. within 10 years, we doubled the size of the workforce. We went from being, as I said, an emigrant society to being an immigrant society.